Okay, we're back with chapters 16 through 20 of The Wild Robot Escapes by Peter Brown. Let's open up the book. We have the bookmark. All right, and let's get started. So, chapter 16, The Robot's Dream. Crows grazed in the pasture. Wind rustled through the tall grass. Clouds drifted over the fields. Farm machines rumbled and buzzed. Milk flowed into bottles. Bottles were packed into boxes. Boxes were loaded onto the milk truck. The truck drove away full and returned empty. Children romped around with their dog. A man sat at his desk. A robot dreamed of escape. Chapter 17, The Birds. Hilltop Farm was home to many birds. Swallows were always swooping low over the grass and picking off insects. Crows cawed from the fields like a gang of hecklers. At night, howls glided above the countryside, silently searching for furry little meals. The robot was stuck on the farm, but the birds were free to go wherever they pleased. Lucky birds. One day, Roz was standing in the pasture, admiring a hawk as he soared through the sky, when the crows began grazing around her. Their slow footsteps crunched in the grass. Their teeth chewed and chewed. Their tails flicked at flies. All the while, Roz stood there, staring up at the hawk. And then came Lily's soft voice. "What are you thinking about, Roz?" The robot turned to the calf. "I am thinking about Bright Bill," she said. "It was not so long ago that I was watching my son soar through the sky. That seems like another lifetime." "You must hate your new life," said Annabelle. "I can't say that I blame you. Farming looks like such grueling work." "Actually, I like farming," said Roz. "Somehow it feels right to spend long hours working with machines and tools and crops and animals. But I miss my old life on the island." Tess had a mouthful of dandelions, but that didn't stop her from speaking. "Maybe you should start thinking of this farm as your home. That island is awfully far away. There's a good chance you'll never make it back there." "Don't say that," cried Lily. "Roz just has to make it home. She needs to be with Bright Bill and her friends." "Tess is right," said Roz. "I may never make it home. If I were a bird, like my son, I could fly home all on my own, anytime I wanted. But I am only a robot." Nobody spoke after that. The cows went back to grazing, and Roz went back to admiring the hawk. Her eyes followed the bird as he soared through the sky, free to go wherever he pleased. Chapter 18, The Entertaining Robot. The children wandered out behind the farm buildings, through a clearing, and over to an old oak tree. It was the same tree their father had climbed when he was a boy. Mr. Sharif's initials were carved into the bark at the bottom of a long list of initials. For generations, all the Sharifs had carved their initials into that tree, going back to their ancestors who first built the farm. Someday the children would add their initials to the list. Beneath the leafy branches was a scattering of acorns. Jad cleared a spot for himself, sat down, and pulled a small computer from his pocket, while Jaya climbed above. The siblings spent the afternoon there, lazing around the tree, until the robot marched past carrying the big, heavy toolbox. "What you doing, Roz?" called Jad. The robot stopped. "The drone had crashed again," she said. "I am going to fix it again." "Do you need any help?" "I do not need any help." "I am bored," said Jaya, her legs dangling above her brother's head. "Can you do something fun, Roz?" The robot pulled down her toolbox and said, "What would you like me to do?" "I don't know," said Jaya, thinking hard. "Can you do a backflip?" "Yes, I can do a backflip." A grin spread across the girl's face. "Roz, I order you to do a backflip." At that, Roz crouched, and then she leapt into the air, flipped backwards, and gently landed on her feet. A perfect backflip. Jad had put his computer away. Jaya jumped down from the branch. The children were impressed. "What else can you do?" said Jad. "Can you juggle?" "Yes, I can juggle. I order you to juggle, some of these acorns." Roz walked up to the tree, picked 3 large acorns from the ground, and began juggling them in perfect rhythm. Jaya studied the robot's movement and then began tossing acorns into the air as well. The first one went a little too high, then the next one a little too far. And soon they all went tumbling back into the grass. "Do you know any jokes?" said Jad. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" "Never mind," Jad scratched his head. "Can you tell us a story?" "What kind of story would you like to hear?" "A robot story," said Jad. "An animal story," said Jaya. "How about a robot and an animal story?" said Roz. The children the children smiled at each other. Then they sat against the tree and looked up at the robotic storyteller. "Once upon a time, there was a robot who lived alone on an island," Roz began. "She spent her time wandering across mountains and forests and meadows, and then something terrible happened. Rocks fell, and the robot tumbled off a cliff. She survived the fall, but sadly, the rocks killed 2 geese and smashed 4 of their eggs. The robot stood there staring at the poor goose family until she heard a tiny voice peeping from somewhere nearby. She followed the peeping voice and discovered a perfect goose egg sunk in the dirt. The robot carefully picked up the egg and carried it away, and when the gosling hatched from its shell, the first thing he saw was the robot looking back. "Mama, Mama," he peeped. The gosling thought the robot was his mother, and from that day on she was. The robot adopted the gosling as her son, and together they made a funny little happy family. The end. The children sat there and thought about Roz's strange story. Then they looked up at her and said, "What happened next?" Chapter 19, The Storytellers. Roz and the children had a new routine. Several times a week, they gathered beneath the oak tree, and Roz would tell stories about the robot on the island. The children loved hearing how the robot survived mudslides and bear attacks and harsh winter weather. They loved hearing how she befriended the island animals. But the stories they loved most were about the robot and her son, the goose. He sounded like such a nice goose. Roz told the children story after story of what she didn't tell them. What she couldn't tell them was that the stories were true and they were about her. The children wanted to get in on the storytelling fun. Jaya told adventure stories about dragons and monsters. Jad told silly stories about aliens in outer space. But as the children grew more comfortable with Roz, they began talking about their own lives. They talked about growing up way out in the country. They talked about their schoolmates and their friends and their family. They talked about how their parents used to work together around the farm and how perfect everything was before the accident. In an instant, their lives were upended. Their mother was gone and their father was injured. Mr. Sharif tried to keep the farm going by himself, but there was so much to do, and he was so weak now. The farm machines powered along doing their jobs as usual, but they needed to be maintained and monitored. Eventually, the machines started breaking down and the farm started falling into pieces. The children wondered if their life would ever feel normal again. "That's why we got you, Roz," said the girl. "We needed you to save this place." "And that's exactly what you're doing," said the boy with a smile. Chapter 20, The Wild Animals. Wildlife can be very good for farmland. Insects pollinate the plants, snakes eat the pests, the droppings of rodents and birds and every other animal act as a natural fertilizer. Roz wanted more of those helpful creatures on the farm, so she let the unused sections of land go wild. Up from the ground emerged native weeds, flowers, woody brambles, and with the wild plants came wild animals. But then some creatures came skulking around who were not helpful at all. It started when Roz noticed a heavy scent floating on the breeze. She followed the scent out to the narrow strip of a forest on the edge of the property. There were clumps of fur in the undergrowth and claw marks in the dirt. There was blood, too, and lots of it. And then she found the carcass. A deer had recently been killed and eaten. What could it be? The robot's head slowly spun around and she scanned the area. Not far from the carcass was a pile of droppings. It looked like it might have come from a dog, but Oscar wasn't large enough or ferocious enough to kill a deer. What kind of animal could have done this? Roz had been standing there in the edge of the property for a while. She imagined Mr. Sharif in his office sitting at a computer eyeing her location on the map. Any minute now, he would hobble to his truck and come racing down the driveway to check on her. Roz didn't want to upset the man, so she left the carcass where it was and returned to her work. But from then on, she kept a careful watch for any more signs of trouble. I wonder what it could be. Large dog attacked a deer, killed it, and ate it. Well, I'm sure we'll find out next. All right, if this next chapter gives you any clue, there it is. All right, we'll see you tomorrow for chapters 21 through 25. Have a good night.